All right, so my paper is minimum wage, EITC, and criminal recidivism. It's by Amanda Agan and Michael Mikowski. In their paper, they're studying the impact of the minimum wage and earned income tax credits on recidivism, which is basically the likelihood that someone who's already been incarcerated returns to jail or prison. So before going into results, I'm going to talk quickly about sort of the theoretical framework and opportunity cost. So they talk about this a lot in the paper where, consider where a world where there is no minimum wage, if the wages someone could earn from criminal activity is greater than what they could earn legally, then the, quote unquote, optimal choice for them might be crime. And I say quote unquote because obviously the optimal choice in the real world should never be crime, but economically it might actually make sense for them to choose crime. But what they're studying here in the paper is if a minimum wage is introduced and it increases to the point such that the wage you could earn from legal employment is greater than what you could earn from the criminal market, then the opportunity cost is such, the opportunity cost for crime is such that you would rationally choose legal employment. And indeed, the authors do find that a minimum wage increase of 50 cents decreases recidivism within a year by about 2.8%. And their findings really do give some validity to people making this trade-off from a financial standpoint, because they only find impacts on property and drug crime and not violent or other crime, which really does seem to be a situation where people are thinking about trade-offs from a financial standpoint. They find more mixed results for earned income tax credits. They only find that it decreases recidivism for females and actually increases crime for males in some capacities. So there's a little more work to be done there.
All right. So my paper was on air pollution and criminal activity, microgeographic evidence from Chicago. So the authors gathered evidence and data from 2001 to 2012 on things like criminal activity, wind pollution, and using that, they were able to find that actually air pollution does have an effect on crime. They found that homes out or areas that were on the south side of interstates were more likely to have a 1.9% increase in crime. And they also found that a deduction of one standard deviation in pollution led to a decrease in 2.9% of crime. I think the paper was pretty interesting, but I think it raises some limitations about the constrained choice model. The constrained choice model sort of assumes that people always have all the information and they're always acting in the most rational sense. But the authors in this paper, they point out that air pollution can have effects on like human hormones going from like serotonin and can lead to more aggressive behavior, which means that maybe actors are not always acting the most rational way, and also actors are being influenced from outside sources that they might not be aware of.
Great. Hello, everybody. My presentation will be on criminals responding to changing prices, and a brief description of the paper's research. The article provides trends of property crimes rising and falling, particularly in London, based on the price of the certain consumer goods. The articles noted the authors, excuse me, noted that the metal goods had the strongest correlation to property crimes when they have a price increase. Although the table that represents this shows that other goods do have the same correlation. For example, right here, jewelry, while there is a correlation, it is not as strong as with fuel, metal, or copper. And the authors noted this as well because there are higher economic costs for attempting to steal jewelry versus attempting to steal some of these cheaper goods, because people are also more likely to report something as stolen when it's something like jewelry than they are for a metal or for fuel. Thus, overall, the economic benefit would be higher in stealing these other three goods than there would be with jewelry. Now, looking at a constraint model, how people value stealing a good versus valuing their own legitimate wages kind of tells a lot about people's determinations for stealing such goods, depending on the prices. And that could be further shown if the price of a good drops. So what would happen if the price of a good drops? Well, we have two feasible frontiers, and when the price of a good drops, if we could see the indifference curves here, oh, wait a minute, look at that. So these indifference curves show that the feasible frontier of the first feasible frontier has a higher utility than the second feasible frontier. But not only that, you are more likely to steal a good if the price of that good is higher than if it was lower, because you would value your legitimate wages under the cheaper good.
All right. So, Jonathan, what do you think are some potential policy implications of your paper and the findings?
Yeah, so I thought it was pretty interesting because air pollution it's like very widespread. But the thing is, it's obviously coming from a big few producers, especially in the city of Chicago. And with air pollution, it's now like with papers like this, it's pretty obvious there's a really big socioeconomic impact. So policy implications ranging from, taxing those producers of pollution or having some parts of their revenue go towards the areas in Chicago where the crime is being affected by air pollution. And just on a larger level, I think for not just Chicago, but the US as a whole, how we sort of view the way we tax external marginal costs, because they affect everyone. But it's really from like a few companies that are doing this. Yeah.
Great insight, Jonathan. I have a question for Garrett mostly. Particularly, what are some of the limitations that the authors kind of don't either miss or like don't go into depth?
Yeah. So I alluded to this at the end of my presentation, but the authors find actually some mixed results for earned income tax credits, where they actually find an increase in both drug and violent crimes for men, whereas for women, they find a decrease. So I think we make a lot of assumptions in the constrained choice model, and the authors actually say they don't have data on anything related to like household or family structure or anything like that, and those kind of things obviously will impact how people are making decisions and what they sort of factor in for what they're going to choose, especially relating to things like crime and employment. So I think that's a sort of big limitation here that we don't necessarily get to see based on the data that the authors have.
And then finally, yeah. So for Freddie, for your paper, I was sort of curious about the question, like for people who are committing crime, there's obviously a fear of getting caught. That's something that plays into their decision making. And like I'm just curious, like how would you even measure something like that? Like how would you factor in the fear of getting caught into, how someone makes decisions?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the authors kind of talked about that a little bit. But essentially, like, it's very hard to measure fear. But one way that the authors alluded to was measuring the punishments for committing such crimes. So if it was something like a slap in the wrist for stealing a minor, like, or a small good, I guess there wouldn't be as much fear to stealing that versus, like, say there was a 15-year prison sentence for stealing a particular good. And that's one way that the authors kind of determined, well, that's how we'll weigh whether or not people find it worth it to steal, or in other words, whether their opportunity costs will be way too high to steal those goods.
Yeah, no, I also think it's pretty interesting about like how laws are enforced, because like if you look at white collar crime where it's not enforced, but the benefits are so much higher, so it occurs so much more, but just no one really goes after it. So yeah, very, very interesting. Professor Johnson, if you're watching this, thank you, and have a good day.
Good stuff.
Okay, stop.